Hey there, welcome to Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horse and rider from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer and developer of Training for Optimal Balance. And with me is the lovely Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor and orthopedic massage therapist. So today's topic, I know we talked about starting on Newton's laws of motion, which we are still going to do. But a couple of things came up. And before we get into the actual detail on the laws of motion, 1, 2, and 3, I thought it might be important to talk about how we use forces all the time in a huge variety of training methods. So this is kind of in preparation as to why we might even want to look more at Newton's laws of motion, because how we use them, not just with horse training, but with all kinds of training, we are working with forces of motion. And when we start to think about it that way, it kind of clarifies, how do we use food as a reward? How strong of an aid do we give? Right? How do we apply the aids? How much force? How light should they be? All of those sort of basic training questions, I think, can be better understood in the context of how we use forces. And I think as part of the title today, I was going to write the title training, like I was thinking forces of motion, and I kind of jotted down training through force. And I went, that sounds terrible. Right? Forceful training. So, like, when we say the word force, especially in the context of training, that has a really negative connotation.
Yeah, it does. Work, grit, push hard. Yeah. Doesn't have very many positive thoughts come into my head.
And so what do you imagine if I say I had to force the horse to do something? What's involved in that?
It comes up as a negative thought but if you compare it, when you use that word in other places, it means something different. To me, it's like I had to use more effort than I really thought, or that I thought I needed.
Right. Or force, to me, speaks specifically when we say we had to force it, whether it's unclogging the vacuum cleaner or getting your horse to turn. It's like we're increasing magnitude with a direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So force is mass times acceleration. So we are mass, how quickly, how slowly, or how quickly, how slowly would be the acceleration. And
Right.
then the magnitude would sort of be how much or how little,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we work with force all the time, from sort of like, getting the last of the ketchup out of the bottle. It's like, but when it comes to training methods, it's all trainers, whether it's all animal trainers across the board. And I'll just kind of speak to that today. But I think even in our interactions with people, there's only two real methods of nonverbal communication, which are positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And negative sounds bad and positive sounds good, but negative reinforcement just means applying forces that interrupt the current activity.
I like that.
Right? So it's an interruption of something is a negative reinforcement. It doesn't mean you have to use a lot of magnitude of force.
Right.
It just means interrupting what is occurring is a negative reinforcement. And then a positive reinforcement is rewarding something that already occurred. So rewarding something that occurred is technically the definition of positive reinforcement when it comes to training. Negative reinforcement is an interruption of what is occurring. right? And that's why when people think in terms of punishment, I go, you're too late. That isn't negative reinforcement because it already occurred.
It occurred 3 or 4 steps before that, and it just
Right.
yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, if you can, I always say if you can catch something before something happens before it happens,
Right. That's
then you
always
have better choices you can make.
right. And even in terms of force, it it gains momentum and it's going to have more magnitude, right? So interrupting something is a true negative reinforcement. A true positive reinforcement is not interrupting and even rewarding what just occurred.
And what do you consider a reward? That's an interesting word.
Something of value to that individual.
Oh,
Oh, that's a really good question. And that just rolled off my tongue because I was thinking
not
in
for
terms of
us,
for the horse
for the horse or the.
and or the rider. Those might
I like
mean
that.
because those might have two very different meanings,
Oh my gosh, yes.
right? The
Oh,
horse doesn't give a flying F about a blue ribbon,
exactly.
but they care very much that they feel safe in the context of a show.
Yeah.
Right. So the rider is going to feel safe at the show because they kind of know what's going on. It's the human environment. They care about the ribbon. But if you're not addressing what the horse cares about, then you're not rewarding. Right.
And you might not get to what happens before it happens. You might be upbeat.
Right.
You might be in the dirt, shall we
Right.
say.
So to put this kind of in the context, because a lot of people will ask me about different training methods. And there's a training method called operant conditioning, which is for like large marine mammals. And I took this awesome tour of the Pittsburgh Zoo one time, and a lot of the zoos are going to working with operant conditioning for regular veterinary care and maintenance of the animals in the zoo, right? In horse training, we use a lot of negative reinforcement, but operant conditioning, because you can't really interrupt a behavior if that animal might turn around and kill you as a response, right? But you can reward positive behavior. So, like operant conditioning at the zoo was so cool because their objective was less stress for the animals. So, every single feeding time, the food was the reward. That's important to them, right? And it's a genuine reward to that individual. So they would teach like the cheetahs they kind of almost have to wait for it to happen.
Ah,
And so, like the large cats would come up to get their food, they'd be at the edge of the barrier, but they would kind of lean up against it, waiting for their food. So they would reward that behavior so that when the vet came, they could draw blood from the
oh,
jugular,
okay.
right? Or I watched the polar bears, like they would present their paws from a hand signal. So in operant conditioning, you give a hand signal, and when they give you the right response, they get the reward. It's entirely 100% based on positive reinforcement. They don't use negative reinforcement at all. So what takes time is they have to train every single feeding. So every
Right.
single time they feed their meal, 5 or 6 meals a day, they're kind of making the animal go, okay, I can do this, okay, I can do that, and rewarding it with food. But it's like that way they could check their teeth, they can check their ears, they can check their paws, they can draw blood, they can give shots, they can do all kinds of things without having to sedate the animal for every vet visit, which was it's just amazing. So operant conditioning and clicker training, which people like for horses, is another operant conditioning, but it's just using a sound as reward with a few treats, or you can mix the sound and the treats. But again, it's based on 100% positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is every time we use aids.
Hmm.
every single time we use aids when we ride, it's a negative reinforcement. So we think when we give a leg aid, we're asking the horse to go forward. But what we're doing is increasing force by squeezing our legs to make the current speed uncomfortable, to interrupt the current speed, right? So a leg aid is resisting halt in the horse's mind.
Okay.
Okay. But we think we're giving a cue and a response, right? Which is somewhat true because that's, well, operant conditioning or any kind of conditioned response. You can teach a horse anything using positive, negative reinforcement, right? To teach them, here's the cue, this is the response I want.
Mhm.
So all of training, whether it's dog training or operant conditioning for, zoos or marine mammals, it's the same methodology. Right. And then I thought about Cesar Millan, who I find fascinating because he was he got called the dog whisperer, not because he was using different methodology. If you really look at what he's doing, it's still positive and negative reinforcement. But what was so different was his objective.
Ah,
And I go, the training objective is what's so different between different schools of training, whether it's within the horse world or even in that case, the dog world. So there's certain dog trainers that are focused on obedience. And Cesar Millan was a problem solver because he focused on the internal experience of the dog. Right. So his objective was more what is the dog thinking and feeling as opposed to what is the dog doing became secondary.
that's huge.
That's huge. And I loved Cesar Millan because that's my goal as a trainer. When I
Yeah.
talk about the learning frame of mind is really just to get the horse out of the sympathetic nervous system and into the parasympathetic nervous system. So that internal shift is a positive reinforcement. It feels better to a body to be in the rest and digest nervous system than it does to be in the fight or flight nervous system. I could give a food reward on top of that. I could use a clicker on top of that, right? But it's still a positive reinforcement because of the experience to the individual. That's why I wanted to talk about this today, because it's really, we can get really mired down in this training method is better than that training method and blah, blah, blah. And I go, it's really the difference is in the objective,
Mm.
right? So even at the zoo, they could train the animals for a negative objective. You can train a dog to attack, or you can train a dog not to attack,
Right.
right? But it's the same training methodology using positive and negative reinforcement to have the conversation about what you want, what you don't want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I feel myself bouncing back and forth from the previous me, which was the blue ribbon girl, and the me now, which is, oh, I'm much more interested on that internal correctness or the parasympathetic or the central nervous system being comfortable.
Right. So that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
You're still riding because you learned how to balance. You're largely riding or sitting on the back of a horse the same way, whether you were competitive or what you're doing now. You're still going through the same actions of, how to tack up, how to get on, how to do all the things that you did as a competitive rider. But the biggest shift is your objective.
Exactly.
And so that's what I mean, that really clarifying what is the objective of this training method helps us know which teacher to work with, which coach to work with, or depending, where do we want to take our horses. And in starting the type of like horse training that I do, I go, it wasn't really out there. I had to kind of thread it together from different mentors until peeling away all of the things, especially working with difficult horses, which were lame horses, it sort of takes you down to an essential level and go, okay, where do we get started if we can't do very much? And it kept peeling back all of these other layers of what we do in training. And I went, oh, well, if my horse doesn't feel safe, I'm battling that, right? So mental thoughts and emotions generate force, right? That force can increase in magnitude the longer the body is in the fight or flight nervous system. And there's a huge amount of energy that goes with that. So a lot of times we're battling the direction, right? And the magnitude with a horse that's in fear. And if we're in fear, we feel the same way. We're going to become more forceful. We're going to choose a direction that makes us feel safer, no matter what we're trying to accomplish. So forces are very much internal. And that's what I saw Cesar Millan doing with the dogs, was sort of getting them out of this sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, still using positive and negative reinforcement. But that feels so good to the body that just getting out of that fight flight nervous system, which is physiological, it's going to affect your heart rate, your digestion, your blood pressure, your breathing, your muscle tone, everything. So I go, wow, it never occurred to me that could be a training objective, because most people think of it as a byproduct of going through the training.
Bam!
Bam! Yeah. But I go, that could be a training objective to help my horse feel safe and get into the parasympathetic nervous system. That's very much a training objective, right? And that's what I watched Cesar Millan do. He didn't put it in those words, but that's what was happening. Yeah. So then I went, well, we don't ride dogs. So the biggest problem we have is also related to the forces of motion that we're straddling on a very powerful, fast animal. I go, so that's a whole nother layer of how we need to work with positive and negative reinforcements. Again, what's the objective? What's the objective? So if in your competitive riding, what was the primary objective?
It was usually driven by time, perfection, speed.
But what was the objective?
To win.
Okay.
Whatever the judge wanted. And it would be I would even go to the point to research the judge.
Yeah, exactly.
So that I could prepare my horse for that person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And that objective has a lot of contingencies, right? And we realize the more we show, you research the judge, because humans have a subjective evaluation. In some competitions, it's entirely up to the judge. Other competitions, it's just the clock, right?
Right.
But a lot of times it's up to the judge. And so you went and researched the judge going, how do I get my objective? Right. And so what happens is when that objective of winning, it can kind of narrow our focus. So then we aren't even aware, does my horse feel safe and comfortable while I win? We haven't included that in our objective.
Oh, that brings up a lot of stuff, because I know I would do poorly if I wasn't in the right state of mind. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
If I would let my fear come up, or my anxiety, or I can't beat that person, whatever my internal conversation would be.
And you
Um,
literally, we all feel it. That's why we call them feelings, because we literally feel forces change inside our body related to those emotions of stress, right? So with a horse, I went, oh, I could train them using these methods. I could train them to be calm. I could train them to keep focusing on me and not the environment. I can
well, that's kind of
train
like the
them.
Alexander technique.
That's exactly. But I had to change my objective to
Right.
work with some horses. Now, if you're a competitive rider and your horse is 100% cooperative and sound, you might not ever need to think about, does my horse feel safe? Because the box has been checked and maybe even taken for granted, right?
Right.
Or you might not think about mechanics until your horse goes lame.
Ouch.
Then you start to think about mechanics, or until you lose performance, you lose time, right? So, really, top athletes, not just in the horse world, are obsessed with retraining to the most efficient mechanical use for the sport. That's what coaching is for human sports, right? It hasn't really filtered down a lot to the equine sports,
Yeah, I know. I
other than
agree.
for the rider, but not so much for the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And so a horse that pays attention, feels calm, is willing to work with me in a lot of different situations, I go, that's a horse I can just do more with. So why don't I train for that first? That became my primary objective. Then I went, oh, the more I was learning about biomechanics, I went, my objective could just be good movement. Like, again, instead of thinking that the byproduct of working through dressage levels is somehow miraculously in the process, we're going to figure out good movement. I go, what if I just focused on good movement as the objective and started to use all different types of training, what I would call strategies, right? So there's lots of training strategies. There's really only two methods, which are positive, negative reinforcement. But there's a lot of strategies or exercises to get a
Right.
horse to either do what you want or reach your training objective. And so peeling everything back, I went, that was just what set my unique horse training course was going, wow, I am now super clear. My objective is to balance the forces of the mind in so that they can operate in their parasympathetic nervous system. My other objective is to balance the forces of motion, right? Which involves the spinal functions, which involves force management, because good mechanics generate easy forces to ride. It's a pleasure,
Yes.
right? So, same thing with you. Why did you gravitate to the Alexander work, or what's the difference between massage therapy and Alexander work as far as objectives?
Yeah. It's kind of like the difference between training and Caesar Milan. I'm as a massage therapist, it's a very I'm doing it to someone. It might affect them internally, but that's not necessarily the objective.
Right.
Where
So the objective is really, and I was going to ask you about that too. If we put it in the context of thinking positive, negative reinforcement, when it comes to massage therapy, what's the negative reinforcement? What are you interrupting that's occurring?
um and they all the different modalities use different language around this, but I think as a body worker, we all try to accomplish the same thing, which is free flowing muscle, connective tissue, and no knots, shall we say, no pain spots, no, and we all can achieve that differently through acupuncture, Ayurvedic, massage, cranial sacral. It doesn't matter. The objective is still the same.
Right. So if we just take the methodology, what's the word I want to use? If we take the strategy of orthopedic massage, the objective there is to interrupt knots in the muscles, interrupt tight muscles, right? With adding force from your hands. That's what riders do when we give aids. We add force, right? Or a massage therapist is adding force in the areas of the body to interrupt a misuse.
Exactly.
But you're not working on the parts of the body that are fine.
I'll check in because they may not be fine, but
right. But if they're fine, then the positive reinforcement is you do nothing.
Right.
Or you might verbally say, wow, this is great. You just have this one knot over here we're going to work on.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of, again, it's just an example to help people understand we could break it down in a nonverbal communication. We always have positive and negative reinforcement. Sometimes the positive reinforcement is the absence of force, the absence of anything. Right? Or the reward is feeling better. That's why people come and pay you to give them a massage. So when we think think of what's the difference between being a massage therapist and being an Alexander instructor?
I'm working more with the psychophysical.
Right. Rather than just the muscle or the soft tissue, you're working with the nervous system.
Right.
So it changed your objective. But when you put hands on people, all of a sudden with that connection, or what we call with riding a contact, you're receiving information about the body.
Yes.
And then you can answer this better than I can, but are you interrupting certain uses by perhaps giving a new direction?
Yes. Yes. And what's interesting is we talk about this as Alexander teachers, and I wonder about this, share with me about horses too. Right before you put hands on, there's like this little bit of nervous energy, like what am I getting into? But as soon as you get hands on, the information is transferred back and forth, and you get more clear than maybe what you saw with your eyes.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like, oh, that's not what I saw exactly.
Yes.
So, but there's that angst right before you make contact. And I don't know if that's an energetic thing, but.
Well, it is energetic, because a really great example of that sort of taken to the extreme would be sort of petting or touching a horse that's hard to catch. And that angst you're talking about before contact is just super exaggerated with a horse that's hard to catch. So they're feeling the energy of touch like as soon as they see you move. You might have to start with reducing that anxiety from 50 yards, and then 40 yards, and then 30 yards, and then 20 yards. But still, that moment where you go to physically touch, that's the trickiest moment.
Yes.
Of catching a horse that's hard to catch, because of that thing you're describing, that little bit of angst right before the touch.
Yeah. We talked about it a lot in Alexander training. And there's even that, with as a body worker too.
And that speaks to what we call energy, is really a very tangible force that's kind of, I think of it as an extension of our sense of touch. Because we're receiving through the sense of touch, but before we physically touch, we can still sense that energy.
Yeah.
And horses have that like at I don't know, superhero level. Like that's a horse's superpower is the sense of touch.
And that makes so much sense to me now, that with the knowledge I have now, as opposed to when I was showing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm able to recognize my state before being around the horses. And I can make changes in my state to be
Yes.
more accommodating energetically around the horses.
Which you learned helped you in the show ring.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did.
then,
I didn't learn it until later in my career, but
yeah. But then what happens if we have the singular objective in the show ring to win and the horse isn't cooperating? Then we experience what we call force. Because we're trying to fight the direction. The horse is accelerating, right? So the horse is mass times acceleration, and it always has direction and magnitude. So if the horse isn't cooperating, that means the direction is not with us, is somewhere else, sideways, backwards, opposite direction.
Up, down.
And the more force we emit, usually the stronger they get at the current idea. Right. And so that's where forcing a horse to do something sort of comes into play. What we're really doing is fighting the direction that the horse is choosing versus the direction we're choosing. Mm-hmm. And that led me to the question, why? And I go, why is, and everybody asks that, but they look around the environment. And I go, the question why is on the inside. It's on the inside. So if the horse is dealing with a whole lot of those feelings, which are the forces of emotion and thought, I go, if they can't manage those, the direction is going to be always towards safety, whatever that means to the individual, which is going to mean something different to a horse than it means to a human. And reward means something very different to a human than it means to a horse. So as a prey animal, there's no greater reward that you can give them than an internal sense of safety.
I think that's real important, the internal.
Yeah, because we can't control it.
No.
We can't make it happen, but we can observe it's either there or it's not there. So again, you can change your objective to go, how do I adjust my positive, negative reinforcement methods to cultivate this objective? Right?
Or do we have to abandon our objective at some time for safety?
Well, that's what I mean. If we don't feel safe or the horse doesn't feel safe, that's kind of a big priority of a body. Right. And if you take a prey animal and a predator and they both feel unsafe, those instinctual reactions are going to clash.
They're going to clash big time.
They're just going to clash, right? Mm-hmm. And so we ask the horse all the time to operate at a level beyond instinct, but we have to be willing to do that ourselves, right? Which again is a training objective, that the horse doesn't react like a horse, but that means too, we can't go around acting like predators. Right? So if we find ourselves in fight or flight, we have to work with ourselves that way too. So in thinking about when we ride, when we give an aid, which is always an application of force generated by our body. So we all have seat, leg, and rein aids. Let's not get fancy. Right? Okay. I don't care how you ride or what tools you use. A rider just has a seat, a leg, and a rein, right? Or we could say hands, seat, and legs. So how we manage the forces that we generate, which is the aid, which is talking to the horse, giving a direction and interrupting the current condition. That's an aid. So aids don't put a horse together. Aids can only say, because they can't say, yes, yes, yes.
Right.
Negative reinforcement never says yes. Positive reinforcement says yes. Negative reinforcement says no.
I remember you always saying, and it always sticks in my head. It's like, no, not that. No, not that. Nope, that's not the answer either.
Exactly.
Oh, yes, you're
Exactly.
on the right path. Good. No,
And
no, not that.
right. Right. And years ago in training, when I was learning biomechanics, I kept thinking, well, the only reward I could give a horse would be to stop work.
Hmm.
Right. And it was sort of, I was gently slapped across the chops and goes, no, feeling good within work is its own reward.
And that's a good point, because that's what people after they've had an Alexander lesson, that's what they're thinking. They're asking me questions like, how do I keep that?
Right. Right.
I want that all the time. And I'm like, yeah, not
Because
gonna
it
happen.
feels so good. And
Yeah, because your central nervous system is finally saying, yes, you're on the right track.
yes,
And so your
because
body wants more.
right. So the training objective is to guide the body back to this ideal blueprint that we're all born with, but none of us use correctly. It's like we didn't really get the instruction manual. We
No
just got
manual.
just the blueprint, right? And so that internal feeling, knowing what that felt like personally, I go and then the horses show me it
Oh,
feels
yeah.
as good to them to make changes towards the ideal, which is the blueprint of their mechanical function. And so that becomes constant positive reinforcement. So my aid says, no, not that direction. No, not that way, with a certain amount of force that would be a low magnitude, high magnitude, or positive reinforcement, which means I just refrain from giving the aid.
Mm.
I take my legs off. I stop.
Oh,
I stop the negative reinforcement, which instantly says I'm no longer saying no. So by default, I'm saying yes.
and they learn that.
Oh, they learn all the time. So, like people who are raising foals for the first time, they're so cute.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so they allow the foal to do this and do that, and they allow the foal to get too close and rear right next to them and don't interrupt the behavior. So, guess what the foal learns? Positive reinforcement because it was allowed. And so that's what they learn to do and become monsters that then you have to retrain. That are monsters, right? Then we learn quickly that just because they're cute and little doesn't mean they can't take you out.
Or, yeah.
And not that they mean to. I go, we have to set boundaries with horses because when we break that prey predator barrier, they don't really know how big they are. They just treat us like another horse,
Right.
especially babies. And so if we don't interrupt horseplay with us, then they just try to play with us, which is, with other horses, that's great. But with us, it puts us in the hospital. So we kind of got to say no.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's where positive reinforcement, when we allow the horse to do something that's either unsafe or something we don't want, we are saying yes if we don't use an interruption, which is negative reinforcement. So it's not good or bad. It's just, are we interrupting or are we allowing?
Oh, I like that.
Right? Are we saying no or are we saying yes? And then a reward like the improvement of internal experience could be one big reward for anybody, or food or shelter, or we can give comforts, creature comforts, and those I look at like an exclamation point now on the internal reward, right? So using clickers, using food, using all of that It's like, but it's like trying to get a scared horse in a trailer that's genuinely afraid of going in the trailer. Everybody learns fast. The food doesn't work.
No, I can attest to that.
The positive reinforcement does not work, right? So then we need negative reinforcement to interrupt the backing out of the trailer or the trying to get away from trying to get in the trailer. As soon as the horse tries to look inside the trailer or make any attempt to get in the trailer, then when we stop the stimulation, the tapping or whatever, that is the positive reward. The ultimate positive reinforcement for trailer loading is that they feel safe inside the trailer.
Right.
And food and whips won't provide that.
No.
The horse has to arrive at that sense of safety inside a trailer. Then they trailer load forever because it's a safe thing.
Do you think that the part about inwardly feeling safe creates the environment for them to be able to get into the trailer? Does that make sense?
100%. Because
Because if a horse's spine is all messed up and they don't feel good inside their skin, asking them to do something that out of their comfort zone, I would imagine would just shut them down.
Right. And you put it perfectly, Deb, because in training, quote unquote, most people think we're using strategies and doing exercises, and it's become a hopeful byproduct. It's not even directly spoken about, but the hopeful byproduct of going through strategies and exercises is that you have a calm horse, which means they feel safe, and you develop the body. But horses can go to a very high level of performance in complete dysfunctional, poor mechanical use. They can also go to very high levels of performance and never feel safe. That's why we use drugs, right? And so that's why drugs are used in high level competition.
I know.
And that's why we try to control the environment so tight in high level competition. And all that tells us is we didn't meet the horse's internal objective of feeling safe and feeling comfortable. So we fight it all the time. Right. But if we just put that objective as part of our training, right? So to me, it's all of training, and then I can perform.
Yes, I like that.
But that's okay, because I've learned, I use the strategies and the exercises for the singular objective of improving the mechanical function. So it's backwards from how we usually think. Or I use the positive negative reinforcement to help the horse arrive at the internal state of feeling safe. And good mechanical use always feels good. So that's how I build comfort. So to me, those internal experiences, however I get there, gives me back that, little girl dream. It makes going to the competition fun and easy. It makes riding on the beach with my wind, the wind blowing my hair, actually safe and not deadly. It means actually wonderful. My horses do nicker at me and want to see me, because I am part of their experience of feeling safe and comfortable and learning new things. And so,
yeah, mine do too now. Yeah, they're always welcome me to the barn, which feels really good.
I know. And again, everybody knows you can't buy that.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't really give a shit that you pay for all the food and the shelter and buy expensive things.
And muck stalls and
muck stalls. They don't care.
That's not high on their list.
No, when you get a little nose bump or a nicker, it's like, that is high praise. You've really done something special. Yeah, that's the horse giving us positive reinforcement. When we get a nicker. And so And I guess that's true too with negative reinforcement. When we're doing something that's generating an internal experience for the horse of feeling less safe or less comfortable, they try to interrupt what's happening by increasing forces against us, which is negative reinforcement for the rider, right? And we just label them as a butthead and go buy another horse. It's better. But really, it's when a horse resists us, they're giving us negative reinforcement or they're giving us feedback that's letting us know I don't feel safe and or I don't feel comfortable right here, right now, doing the job that you think should be so effing easy.
Yeah.
You try
You
it.
get down here and let's
Yeah.
change roles.
Get down here. Let's put the saddle on you and you carry that 5-year-old rider.
You see if you can get to letter A straight. Let's see
Exactly.
you do it.
Let's see you do it. Yeah. Yeah. You transition at the letter. That's not so easy. Yeah. So I think that is an important conversation to have before we even really talk about how the laws of motion work, because the laws of motion are a physical reality. I go, biomechanics are a physical reality. The two nervous systems, fight, flight, rest, and digest, they're just a physical reality. And I go, when we work with those things, we don't have to do condition response because it's dynamic when we're working with the actual laws of physics that are at play. And looking at our objective as safety and mechanical comfort sort of keeps us on a track where we're going to have a safe, healthy, sound horse as we're developing the athletic ability to do what we want. And along the way, the horse is going to point out every flaw we have. They're very good at that, right? Either through poor performance, negative reactions, interrupting our agenda for the day.
Yeah, I often ask my horses, what are you trying to teach me?
Yes. Yeah, and it's a much better question because it actually, our brain will come up with an answer when we pose it like that as a question. Mm-hmm. And then we figure out, okay, here's the method and here's the strategy to get to this objective. That's all training is in a nutshell, right? But if the horse goes against us and we label it as, oh, he's lazy. Oh, he has bad conformation. Oh, he's just that way. Then our brain doesn't seek any new information. It just sort of shuts down. And that's how we get stuck in a training loop where we can't go farther. And then it makes us think we need a new horse. And then the trainer who makes the commission sort of reinforces that thought that we need a new horse. And so on it goes. But I'm like, every horse and rider can improve. And especially if we take an internal objective, mm-hmm. I go, everybody can improve. And that's what you do with the Alexander work. It's like sometimes the improvement is to get out of pain.
Sometimes that is.
Sometimes the improvement is just to feel safe inside your own skin.
Yeah. And if I'm having a pain, it was last week, I split firewood for like 4 hours and I woke up in the middle of the night just going, oh God.
Yeah.
So I went and did a lie down on the floor in the living room and just said, what are you trying to tell me? What is the information I need to help myself get out of pain? And it was a totally different answer because it wasn't the place that was painful that needed to change. It was someplace else in my body that had to change to make that pain go away. So being curious just to pause and ask, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to tell me?
Yes,
absolutely.
Absolutely. And not just to go into increasing magnitude, which is what we call forcing it to happen. right?
Right.
And forcing it to happen sort of gives all of us the image of a lot of magnitude.
And that word force comes back again.
Much force. But force
Much
could,
force.
right? Force could be when we don't force something. Like if I want to just move a piece of paper, I'm not forcing it, but I'm still applying force.
I like that. Yeah.
Right. So I'm applying force. And then there's only a certain amount of force measured in magnitude, right? So I either need a little or a lot. So when we say we forced it, that means we used a lot.
That's what most of us think when we use that language. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But even with our aids, like the direction of our aids, we don't think about. Like, are we squeezing them in, or are we sort of using our legs to encourage a little bit forward within the inward? So directions can be really specific. And then when we apply the aid, are we going right to like level 10 maximum capacity of leg force? Or are we starting with a fingertip touch and slowly increasing the force until the horse responds? Right. And then if the horse didn't respond the way we wanted, are we just applying force over and over and over? Because eventually the application of constant force just shuts down the nervous system. It means nothing. So that conversation between positive and negative reinforcement is very important. The positive reinforcement, the release of the aid, is the yes, thank you. And the negative reinforcement, the application of the aid or the increase of force in the aid, is a no, don't do that.
Right.
And that becomes the conversation. So that's all of training. We're either saying, yes, please, thank you, or nope, not so much. Nope, don't do that. Right. We don't have to scream, what were you thinking? Don't do that. But we can just say, that's not a good idea.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So I think that was good. Talk about training methods, and then we can get to Newton's laws of motion in the next couple of podcasts. So thank you guys for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and share if you like it. And we're trying to stay on a weekly schedule with the Horse Geeks podcast. Make comments, please. Let us know if
Yes.
there's
Any
anything.
ideas you want us to cover over conversation, please let us know.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Be kind.
Bye.
Bye.